Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on being a good neighbor. In the 3 years since she moved into the quiet suburban subdivision of Maple Ridge Estates, she'd maintained her lawn, kept her music at reasonable volumes, and even baked cookies for the annual block party. What she hadn't counted on was living next door to Margaret Thornfield, a woman who seemed to believe that her position as HOA treasurer gave her unlimited access to everyone else's private lives. It started innocuously enough. Margaret would water her pristine flower beds while craning her neck to peer over the fence that separated their backyards. She'd linger by her mailbox whenever Sarah pulled into her driveway, timing her retrieval of bills and catalogs to coincide perfectly with Sarah's return from work. At first, Sarah chalked it up to neighborly curiosity mixed with perhaps a touch of loneliness. Margaret lived alone in her immaculate colonial-style home, and Sarah could understand the desire for human connection. But Margaret's interest quickly evolved from casual observation to something far more unsettling. Sarah began noticing Margaret's face pressed against her kitchen window at odd hours, watching as Sarah prepared dinner or cleaned dishes. The woman had taken to walking her small, trembling chihuahua past Sarah's house multiple times each evening, always slowing to a crawl as she passed the front windows. Most disturbing of all were the phone calls. Sarah, dear, Margaret's voice would crackle through the phone, syrupy sweet, but with an edge that made Sarah's skin crawl. I couldn't help but notice you had a gentleman caller last night. The HOA guidelines clearly state that overnight guests should be registered with the Community Management Office. Sarah had checked the HOA bylaws 3 times. No such rule existed. The calls became more frequent and more intrusive. Margaret questioned Sarah about her work schedule, her weekend plans, even her grocery shopping habits. She'd cite fictional HOA violations about everything from the color of Sarah's porch light to the height of her grass, which was maintained by the same landscaping company that serviced half the neighborhood. I'm just looking out for property values, Margaret would insist whenever Sarah pushed back. As treasurer, it's my responsibility to ensure all residents maintain community standards. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday in July. Sarah had been working from home, conducting virtual meetings from her home office, which faced the backyard. During a particularly important presentation to potential clients, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Margaret was standing at her bedroom window on the second floor of her house, holding what appeared to be binoculars trained directly on Sarah's office window. Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks as she realized Margaret had likely been watching her work for who knows how long. The woman had a clear view into Sarah's office, where she handled confidential client information, took personal calls, and sometimes worked in casual clothes. The violation felt profound and deeply personal. After the meeting ended, Sarah stood at her office window and waved directly at Margaret, who quickly disappeared behind her curtains. That evening, Sarah installed blackout curtains in her office and bedroom, feeling like a prisoner in her own home. But Margaret wasn't deterred. If anything, the blocked windows seemed to intensify her obsession. She began timing her dog walks to coincide with Sarah's movements around the house, following the sounds of activity from room to room. She positioned herself strategically in her yard to catch glimpses through gaps in curtains or reflections in windows. Sarah knew she had to document this escalating behavior, but she never imagined that Margaret would provide such perfect evidence herself. The opportunity for justice arrived on a Saturday morning that started like any other weekend in the neighborhood. Sarah had planned to spend the day catching up on household chores and maybe grilling some burgers on her back patio. She deliberately chosen the weekend to work in her backyard, hoping to enjoy her own property without Margaret's constant surveillance. She should have known better. At precisely 9:17 a.m., Sarah stepped onto her patio carrying a cup of coffee and her laptop, planning to answer emails while enjoying the morning sunshine. The back door had barely closed behind her when she heard the telltale scraping sound of an aluminum ladder being dragged across concrete. Her blood pressure spiked as she realized what was happening. Through the privacy fence that separated their properties, Sarah could hear Margaret's labored breathing and muttered complaints about keeping an eye on things and maintaining community standards. The scraping stopped, followed by the distinctive sound of ladder rungs being climbed. Sarah's jaw dropped as Margaret's gray-haired head appeared above the 6-foot fence line, followed by her shoulders. The woman had positioned an extension ladder against the side of her own house and climbed high enough to peer directly down into Sarah's backyard. Margaret held her phone in one hand, clearly recording, while gripping the ladder with the other. "Margaret," Sarah called out, her voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing?" Margaret startled at being caught, nearly losing her balance. "Oh, Sarah, dear, I was just checking on some damage to my gutters. You know how these summer storms can be." It was a laughable lie. Margaret's house was immaculate, and there hadn't been a storm in weeks. More importantly, she was facing away from her own gutters. Foam pointed directly at Sarah's patio furniture and sliding glass doors. "With your phone out," Sarah demanded, pulling out her own device. Something told her she needed to document this moment. "I was just taking pictures for my insurance adjuster," Margaret stammered, but her face had turned an alarming shade of red. She tried to adjust her position to get a better angle of Sarah's patio, reaching precariously with her phone-holding hand. That's when physics intervened. Margaret had extended herself too far from the ladder's base, and her center of gravity shifted beyond the point of recovery. Sarah watched in stunned slow motion as Margaret's eyes widened with the realization that she was falling. The woman made a desperate grab for the ladder with her phone hand, but it was too late. Sarah's finger had already pressed record on her own phone when Margaret began her ungraceful descent. The footage captured everything: Margaret's shocked expression, her flailing attempt to regain balance, and the spectacular crash as she tumbled backward off the ladder, landing with a tremendous thud in her own prize-winning hydrangea bushes. The impact was followed by a string of profanity that would have made a sailor blush, completely at odds with Margaret's usual prim and proper demeanor. Her phone had gone flying, landing with a crack on her concrete patio while the ladder crashed down beside her, narrowly missing her legs. "Oh my God, Margaret," Sarah called out, genuinely concerned despite everything. "Are you hurt?" Margaret's response was a mortified groan as she extracted herself from the destroyed flower bed, dirt and blue petals clinging to her floral print sundress. She was clearly more embarrassed than injured, though she definitely had some bruises to show for her spying expedition. "I'm fine," Margaret snapped, trying to brush herself off while avoiding eye contact. "Just lost my balance while checking those gutters." Sarah looked down at her phone screen, watching the perfect replay of Margaret's surveillance attempt and subsequent fall. The video clearly showed Margaret recording Sarah's patio, her shock reaction to being caught, and her karmic tumble into the bushes. There was better evidence than Sarah could have hoped for. "Well," Sarah said carefully, stopping her own recording, "maybe next time you should call a professional for gutter inspection. Someone with proper safety equipment." Margaret's face flushed even redder as she realized the implications. She'd been caught red-handed, quite literally, and they both knew it. As she limped toward her back door, dragging her damaged ladder behind her, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the universe had just served up the perfect opportunity for justice. The question now was what to do with this golden piece of evidence. Sarah spent the rest of Saturday replaying the video on her phone, each viewing making Margaret's behavior seem even more outrageous. The footage was crystal clear. Margaret climbing the ladder with obvious intent to spy, phone and hand recording Sarah's private space, and then the spectacular fall that felt like divine intervention. But having evidence and knowing what to do with it were two entirely different things. By Sunday evening, Sarah had reached her decision. Margaret's behavior had crossed every reasonable boundary, and a simple conversation wasn't going to solve the problem. If Margaret wanted to act like a professional busybody, then perhaps it was time her actual profession knew about her extracurricular activities. The investigation began Monday morning. Sarah had always wondered how Margaret could afford her immaculate house and seemingly endless free time to patrol the neighborhood. The woman never seemed to work regular hours, yet her home was clearly expensive and meticulously maintained. A little digging into public records revealed some interesting information. Margaret Thornfield wasn't just any nosy neighbor. She was Margaret Thornfield, Senior Compliance Officer at Meridian Financial Services, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. The company's website featured a professional headshot of Margaret, describing her as dedicated to maintaining the highest standards of ethical conduct and professional integrity in all client relationships. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee reading that description. The irony was almost too perfect. Further research revealed that Meridian Financial Services prided itself on discretion, confidentiality, and respect for client privacy. Their mission statement emphasized trust, integrity, and the absolute protection of sensitive information. The company's code of conduct, available online, explicitly stated that employees were expected to maintain these standards both in their professional and personal lives, as their behavior reflected on the firm's reputation. But Sarah's most significant discovery came through a neighborhood Facebook group she'd forgotten she joined. Scrolling through recent posts, she found a comment from Margaret herself, posted just 2 weeks earlier on a thread about property management. Margaret had written, "As someone who works in compliance and risk management, I understand the importance of thorough documentation and proper oversight. That's why I take my HOA responsibilities so seriously. We all need accountability." The post had Margaret's full name and her employer listed right in her Facebook profile. She literally connected her professional credentials to her neighborhood surveillance activities. Sarah screenshotted everything. The final piece of the puzzle came from Margaret's own LinkedIn profile. Not only did it confirm her position at Meridian Financial, but it also showcased her supposed expertise in regulatory compliance, privacy protection, and ethical business practices. Her summary boasted about her unwavering commitment to maintaining professional standards and protecting confidential information. Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at her computer screen. Margaret had built her entire professional identity around the very principles she was violating in her personal life. The woman who made her living ensuring others followed rules about privacy and ethical conduct was climbing ladders to spy on her neighbors with a phone camera. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it also presented the perfect solution. Sarah spent Tuesday evening crafting her strategy. She wouldn't just send the video. She'd provide context. She researched Meridian Financial's executive team, found the chief compliance officer and HR director, and located their professional email addresses through the company directory. She also found the company's ethics hotline designed for reporting conduct violations. The documentation package Sarah prepared was thorough but professional. She included a timeline of Margaret's escalating harassment, screenshots of Margaret's social media posts connecting her professional role to her neighborhood activities, and of course, the video evidence of Margaret's literal fall from grace while attempting to conduct surveillance. In her cover letter, Sarah was careful to maintain a respectful tone while clearly outlining the situation. She explained how Margaret's behavior violated the very principles of privacy and ethical conduct that she supposedly upheld professionally. Sarah emphasized that she wasn't seeking monetary compensation or dramatic consequences. She simply wanted the harassment to stop. I believe Ms. Thornfield may benefit from a professional reminder about the importance of respecting others' privacy and maintaining appropriate boundaries, Sarah wrote. As someone whose job involves ensuring others follow ethical guidelines, I'm sure she would want to address this situation promptly and professionally. Before sending the emails, Sarah made one final check of her evidence. The video was clear, the timeline was documented, and Margaret's own social media posts had created the connection between her professional ethics role and her personal misconduct. Everything was factual, verifiable, and presented respectfully. Wednesday morning, with her coffee still steaming and her resolve firmly in place, Sarah clicked send on 3 separate emails. One to Meridian Financial's chief compliance officer, one to their HR director, and one to their ethics hotline. Each email was identical, professional, and devastating in its quiet effectiveness. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if professional consequences would finally put an end to Margaret's neighborhood surveillance campaign. The response came faster than Sarah had anticipated. By Thursday afternoon, less than 24 hours after sending her carefully crafted emails, Sarah's phone rang with an unknown number displaying a local area code. Ms. Martinez? This is Jennifer Chen, Director of Human Resources at Meridian Financial Services. I believe you recently contacted our office regarding one of our employees. Sarah's heart rate quickened. Yes, that's correct. I want to thank you for bringing this matter to our attention in such a professional manner. We take these concerns very seriously, particularly given Ms. Thornfield's role in our compliance department. Would you be available for a brief phone interview to discuss the situation in more detail? The conversation that followed was thorough but respectful. Jennifer Chen asked thoughtful questions about the timeline of events, confirmed details about the documentation Sarah had provided, and seemed genuinely concerned about the implications of Margaret's behavior. She was particularly interested in Margaret's social media posts that had connected her professional credentials to her neighborhood activities. Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that we've initiated a formal investigation into this matter. Employee conduct outside of work that reflects poorly on our company's values is taken very seriously, especially for someone in Ms. Thornfield's position. We'll be in touch once we've completed our review. Friday evening brought the first sign that Sarah's strategy was working. Margaret's usual dog-walking routine was noticeably absent. No face appeared at the bedroom window during Sarah's evening phone call with her sister. The oppressive feeling of being constantly watched had lifted for the first time in months. Saturday morning revealed why. As Sarah retrieved her newspaper from the front porch, she noticed Margaret loading suitcases into her car. Their eyes met across the driveways, and Sarah was struck by how different Margaret looked. The woman who had always carried herself with smug authority now appeared deflated, almost fragile. Margaret approached the property line hesitantly, her usual confident stride replaced with uncertain steps. Sarah, Margaret began, her voice lacking its typical condescending tone. I wanted to apologize for everything. I know I crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. Sarah studied Margaret's face, looking for signs of the manipulative behavior she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, she saw what appeared to be genuine shame and embarrassment. My employers have placed me on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They're requiring me to attend professional conduct counseling, and they made it clear that my job is in jeopardy. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. While she'd wanted consequences for Margaret's behavior, seeing the woman's obvious distress stirred unexpected sympathy. I'm staying with my sister in Phoenix for a few weeks, Margaret added, to give you space and to figure things out. I know I have no right to ask, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me eventually. Margaret, Sarah said carefully, What you did wasn't just inappropriate. It was a violation of my privacy and my sense of safety in my own home. But I genuinely hope you get the help you need to understand why that behavior was wrong." Margaret nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I think I got so caught up in being important and having authority that I forgot about treating people with basic respect. Losing my job might be exactly what I deserve." The conversation that followed was the most honest exchange the two women had ever had. Margaret admitted that her behavior had escalated gradually, starting from a place of loneliness and boredom, but evolving into something she now recognized as deeply problematic. She acknowledged that her position at the HOA and her professional credentials had given her a false sense of entitlement to monitor and judge others. "I kept telling myself I was protecting the neighborhood, maintaining standards," Margaret said. "But really, I think I was just trying to feel important and in control. And I completely lost sight of your right to privacy and peace in your own home." As Margaret prepared to leave for Phoenix, she made one final gesture. She handed Sarah a sealed envelope containing her resignation from the HOA treasurer position and a formal written apology that she'd also sent to the other residents she'd harassed over the years. Word of Margaret's departure spread quickly through the neighborhood. Sarah learned from other residents that she hadn't been Margaret's only target. The woman had been conducting various forms of surveillance and harassment throughout the community, always justified by her HOA position or professional expertise. The most surprising revelation came from Tom Bradley, who lived 3 houses down. Margaret had been documenting his lawn care schedule and filing complaints about his garbage placement for over a year. "I had no idea other people were dealing with this too," Tom told Sarah. "I thought I was going crazy." By Sunday evening, as Sarah sat on her back patio for the first time in months without constantly checking over her shoulder, she reflected on the week's events. The oppressive atmosphere that had dominated her home life had lifted completely. For the first time since moving to Maple Ridge Estates, she felt truly comfortable in her own backyard. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah realized that standing up to Margaret's behavior hadn't just solved her own problem. It had freed the entire neighborhood from a pattern of harassment that had been escalating unchecked for years. 3 months later, Sarah's life had settled into a rhythm she'd almost forgotten was possible. She could work from her home office without blackout curtains, enjoy her morning coffee on the patio without feeling watched, and host friends for barbecues without worrying about intrusive phone calls the next day. The simple pleasure of privacy in her own home felt like a luxury she'd never take for granted again. Margaret had returned from Phoenix after 6 weeks, but the woman who came back was notably different. She kept to herself, maintained her property quietly, and offered polite but brief greetings when their paths crossed. According to neighborhood gossip, Margaret had managed to keep her job at Meridian Financial, but only after completing mandatory counseling and agreeing to strict behavioral monitoring at work. Her role had been modified to remove any supervisory responsibilities, and she was no longer involved in client-facing activities. The most significant change, however, was in the neighborhood itself. Margaret's resignation from the HOA had created an opening that several residents stepped up to fill, forming a more collaborative leadership structure. The new treasurer, Lisa Wang, had implemented transparent communication policies and established clear boundaries about what constituted legitimate community concerns versus personal harassment. Sarah had been invited to join the new HOA advisory committee, a role she'd initially hesitated to accept, but she realized that her experience with Margaret had given her valuable insight into the importance of accountability and proper oversight of community leadership positions. "We can't let one person's interpretation of community standards become a tool for harassment," Sarah had told the committee during their first meeting. Her story had prompted several other residents to share their own experiences with Margaret's overreach, leading to the development of new guidelines for HOA conduct and complaint procedures. The video that had started it all remains saved on Sarah's phone, though she'd never shared it publicly. She kept it as a reminder of the moment she decided to take control of her situation rather than continuing to suffer in silence. Occasionally, when she doubted her decision to report Margaret, she'd remember the feeling of being trapped in her own home and know she'd made the right choice. Tom Bradley had become an unexpected friend through the ordeal. He confided that Margaret's harassment had made him consider selling his house despite loving the neighborhood. "I kept thinking it was somehow my fault," he told Sarah. "Like maybe I really was violating some rule I didn't know about. Your courage to speak up made me realize the problem wasn't with us." The ripple effects extended beyond their immediate neighborhood. Sarah had learned through Jennifer Chen that Meridian Financial had used Margaret's case to revise their employee conduct policies and strengthen their ethics training programs. The incident had prompted company-wide discussions about how professional standards should extend to personal behavior, particularly for employees in compliance and oversight roles. Perhaps most surprisingly, Sarah had received a handwritten letter from Margaret 6 weeks after she returned from Phoenix. The letter was thoughtful and introspective, acknowledging not just the immediate harm Margaret had caused, but also the deeper issues that had driven her behavior. I realized now that I was using my authority as a way to feel important and in control, Margaret had written. My job gave me power over others' compliance, and I carried that into my personal life in completely inappropriate ways. The counseling has helped me understand that my behavior wasn't just annoying. It was a form of abuse of power that violated your fundamental right to peace and privacy. The letter included no requests for forgiveness or friendship, just accountability and a commitment to do better. Sarah had found it oddly moving, recognizing the courage it must have taken for Margaret to write such an honest self-assessment. On a warm evening in October, as Sarah sat on her patio grading papers and enjoying the sounds of children playing in nearby yards, she reflected on how much had changed. The experience with Margaret had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of documentation, the power of professional accountability, and the necessity of standing up to harassment rather than hoping it would resolve itself. She had also learned that sometimes the most effective response to bullying behavior isn't confrontation or escalation, but strategic action through appropriate channels. Margaret's employers have been far more effective at changing her behavior than any neighborhood dispute resolution could have been. Most importantly, Sarah had discovered that her willingness to take action had empowered others to speak up about their own experiences. The neighborhood was now a more genuinely friendly and respectful place, with residents looking out for each other rather than monitoring each other. As autumn settled over Maple Ridge Estates, Sarah realized that Margaret's spectacular fall from that ladder had become a symbol of something larger: the inevitable consequences of crossing boundaries and abusing positions of authority. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, captured perfectly on a cell phone camera and delivered through the very professional channels that the perpetrator had claimed to represent. The ladder, Sarah noticed, had never been put back up against Margaret's house.